Seraphine Vane had learned very early in life that some people are born to be seen, and others are born to be useful. She had always been the second kind. She lived on the edge of the Ironmore Pack, in a small house that leaked when it rained and creaked when the wind came down from the northern hills. Her father had once been a respected beta, a man of standing. That was before he made a choice that cost the pack 3 warriors and his own reputation in a single night. He died 2 years later, quietly, as if ashamed. Seraphine was 15. She had been paying for his mistakes ever since. She did not complain about this. Complaining required an audience, and Seraphine had never really had one. At 19, her wolf appeared. Most wolves in the pack shifted for the first time between 12 and 14. When Seraphine finally felt that warm, silver presence rise inside her at 19, the pack healer documented it without comment, and the alpha noted it without interest. She named her wolf Lyra, privately, the way she kept most things that mattered to her, quietly and close to her chest. By the time the blood convergence was announced, Seraphine was 22. She had no title, no rank, and no illusions about either. The blood convergence happened once every decade. The Alpha King of all packs traveled to each territory, received tribute, assessed strength, and reminded everyone, politely, who was in charge. The Ironmore pack spent 3 weeks preparing. The Great Hall was scrubbed until it gleamed. Every wolf of rank received a new ceremonial sash. Seraphine was assigned to the kitchens. She did not mind. The kitchens were warm. The night of the feast, she was carrying a pot of broth from one counter to another when someone knocked over a jar of oil near the open flame. The fire moved fast, as fire always does, catching the dry edge of a hanging cloth and then climbing toward the ceiling with cheerful indifference to the chaos below. 2 young pack members, barely more than children, froze completely. Seraphine did not freeze. She set down the pot, grabbed both children by the backs of their collars, and dragged them out through the side door before the smoke had time to thicken. Then she went back in, found the heavy wet cloth she had been using to strain stock, and beat the fire down before it reached the upper shelves. When she finally walked out into the cool corridor, face flushed, hair falling loose, the front of her apron streaked with ash, she was not looking where she was going. She walked directly into a wall. Except the wall was warm, and it breathed, and when she looked up, it had a face. The man was tall in the way that certain people are tall, not just in height, but in presence, as if the air around him had agreed to make extra room. He had dark hair, sharp features, and eyes the color of deep water in winter. He wore no crown, but he did not need one. Every line of him said what he was before his title could. Calum Draven, Alpha King of the Obsidian Throne, looked down at her. Seraphine looked up at him, and then something happened that neither of them had planned, prepared for, or wanted. The bond arrived between them like a key turning in a lock that neither of them knew existed. It was not subtle. It was not gentle. It moved through Seraphine from her chest outward, warm and certain and enormous, and she felt Lyra wake up inside her with a sound that was almost a cry. Not a cry of pain, a cry of recognition. She saw it hit him too. She saw his whole body go still, the way a person goes still when something surprises them so completely that their body simply stops. His eyes darkened. Something vast and dark moved behind them, something that was not entirely him. The corridor was not empty. Several people had followed from the main hall when the fire alarm was raised. They were all watching. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Calum Draven stepped back. He did not do it gently. He did it with decision. When he spoke, his voice was very even, very clear, and very public. He spoke in the old tongue first, because the formal rejection required it, and then in the common language, because he wanted there to be no confusion. He said the words that severed what had just been found. He gave his reasons carefully. An Alpha King could not be bonded to an unranked wolf from a disgraced line. The stability of 12 packs was not a small thing. The realm required what it required. Every person in the corridor heard every word. Seraphine stood very still through all of it. She felt the bond close like a door shutting, felt Lyra go quiet in a way that was different from sleep, felt a thin, bright line of pain along her collarbone that she understood, later, was the mark the severing left. When he finished, she looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. Then she said, clearly and without any particular drama, 3 words. Then go, King. She turned and walked back into the kitchen to finish her work, because there were still mouths to feed, and the broth was going cold. She left Ironmore the following week. There was nothing to stay for, and, she found, that was actually a relief. The outer territories were wilder, less governed, and considerably more honest. People there needed help more than they needed someone to look down on, which meant Seraphine was suddenly, quietly, in the right place. She found an old healer named Marin, living in a stone cottage, 3 territories from anywhere important. Marin was sharp, unsentimental, and extraordinarily skilled. She took one look at Seraphine and said, "You can stay if you work." Seraphine worked. She learned to use plants that grew in cold soil. She learned to close wounds cleanly. She learned a rarer thing, the art of reading a wolf's inner state, of sensing through careful attention and touch what was happening inside the creature that lived alongside a person. Marin called it bond reading. Most healers had heard of it. Almost none could do it. Seraphine had a natural feeling for it that Marin said she had not seen in 40 years of practice. After a year, Marin passed the cottage and its patients to her, and walked north without explanation, which was entirely in character. Seraphine built a small clinic on land that sat at the corner of 3 territories. Wolves who could not afford pack healers came to her. She did not ask about their rank. She treated them, and let them pay what they could, which was sometimes coin, and sometimes preserved food, and sometimes nothing at all. And she found that she did not mind any version of this arrangement. She built a life. It was small, and it was real, and it was entirely hers. She did not let herself think often about what had happened at the convergence. She thought about the scar along her collarbone sometimes, especially in cold weather, especially on full moons, when Lyra would grow very still inside her and listen to something Seraphine could not quite hear. She did not know what Lyra was listening for. She told herself it did not matter. She was wrong about that, but she would not find out for another year. What was happening, on the other side of what had been severed, was this. Every full moon, Calum Draven did not sleep. His wolf, Nox, was very old and very powerful, and Nox had decided that the rejection was not his concern. Nox had found what he had been looking for, and no amount of political calculation was going to convince him otherwise. So every month, when the full moon rose, Nox rose with it, and he called. Not a howl, something more specific than a howl. A sound that came through Calum's throat without his permission, shaped around a name, pointed always in the direction of wherever Seraphine happened to be. The direction changed as she moved across the outer territories, and Nox always knew exactly where to face. Calum's beta, Ren, was a quiet, observant man who kept careful records and said very little about what he noticed. He began noting the direction Calum faced each full moon. After 6 months, he had enough data to track Seraphine's approximate location across the continent. He did not share this with anyone. He kept the records in case they ever became relevant. They became relevant 18 months after the convergence, when the still sickness appeared in the eastern outer territories. It was a terrible illness. It targeted not the body, but the bond between a wolf and their inner creature, severing that connection slowly and completely, leaving people alive but hollow, human without the wolf that was supposed to be part of them. The packs were frightened in the way that only a new, invisible threat can frighten people who are used to being physically strong. Calum dispatched healers. The healers were good, but the illness was strange, and none of them had seen anything quite like it. Reports came back from the eastern territories. Most treatments were slowing nothing. One border clinic, however, was reporting actual progress. The same treatment, applied consistently, was demonstrably slowing the progression in confirmed cases. Patients were stabilizing. The healer at that clinic was described as a young woman with silver-streaked hair who had studied under old Marin and had an unusual ability to read a wolf's inner state. Ren came to Calum with the report, and also, without a word, with the map. He set both on the table and left the room. Calum looked at the map for a long time. The clinic was in the same direction Nox had called on the last full moon. He rode out the next morning. He told his council it was to assess the situation personally, which was true, just not the whole truth. He arrived at the clinic after 3 days of travel. It was a modest building, well-maintained, with clean windows and a small garden along the south wall that he would later learn Seraphine tended herself in the early mornings. There were several sick wolves inside. There were 2 young apprentices moving efficiently between them. And in the middle of it all was Seraphine. She was older. Or not older exactly, but more fully herself, the way people sometimes become more themselves when they have had the space to grow into their own shape. She was giving instructions clearly and calmly to one of the apprentices, one hand resting lightly on the forearm of a patient, that bond-reading attention present in the careful angle of her head. She had not seen him yet. He stood in the doorway, and he had a full minute to simply watch her. Knox went completely quiet inside him. Not the absence of the call. Something better than that. The call had always been reaching, straining toward something not present. This was different. This was the stillness of arrival. Seraphine turned and found him standing there. She looked at him. Her expression did not change into anything dramatic. She assessed him the way she might assess a new development in a patient's condition, noting it, thinking about what it meant, deciding how to respond. "Alpha King," she said, "if you are here to help, wash your hands. If you are not, you are in my way." He washed his hands. He stayed. He stayed for 8 days. He was not a trained healer, but he was capable, and he did not pretend otherwise, and he took instruction without complaint, which Seraphine found more useful than most people expected it to be. He carried things. He sat with frightened patients when the apprentices were busy. He learned what the treatment protocol was, and he followed it correctly, which sounds simple, but in practice requires paying close attention. He watched her work the way he had not let himself watch anything in a long time. He watched the way she spoke to a patient who was terrified, not talking over the fear but sitting with it, acknowledging it as completely reasonable, taking her time. He watched her tired at the end of a long day, quieter, moving more slowly, still precise. He watched her laugh once, briefly, at something one of the apprentices said, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and he felt something shift in his chest that he had no formal name for. On the 6th night, the last patient of the day had stabilized, and the apprentices had gone to rest, and it was only the 2 of them, and the quiet held between them for a long time before Calum spoke. He told her about the full moons, all of them, the way Knox called every single month without fail, the direction, the fact that Wren had kept a map. He told it plainly, not as a romantic confession, but as a fact he thought she deserved to know, because it was true, and because she was someone who had always deserved the truth, and had not received it from him the first time. Seraphine listened. She sat across from him at the small table in the corner of the clinic, and she listened to everything, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told him her truth. She said she had never hated him. She said she understood that a king makes calculations that an ordinary person does not have to make, and that the decision itself, the rejection, she had been able to understand even when it hurt. What she had not been able to forgive was the performance of it, the way it had been done in front of everyone, being made into a lesson for his court. That was what had stayed with her, not the loss of the bond, but the way she had been made to feel, in front of witnesses, as though she was something that needed to be corrected. He was quiet when she finished. Then he said, "You are right. I was afraid, and I made you pay for it publicly. That was wrong. It was not a speech. It was just the truth, which, coming from him, she found was worth more than any speech would have been." They did not resolve everything that night. Some things cannot be resolved in a single conversation, and Seraphine was not someone who let relief do the work that time was supposed to do. On the 8th night, the full moon rose. Calum stepped outside the clinic alone. He looked up at the sky. He did not fight Knox. For the first time in 18 months, he simply did not fight. Knox called. The sound went out across the empty hills, clear and certain, and carrying her name in the only language a wolf really knows, which is need, and recognition, and the simple knowledge of where home is. Inside the clinic, Seraphine heard it. Lyra, who had been quiet for 18 months, lifted her head. Seraphine stood up. She walked to the door. She opened it and stepped out into the cool night air, and stood 20 feet from him, and listened to his wolf call her name into the open sky. Then she let Lyra answer, just once. soft and clear and chosen. The severed bond between them did not come back. Severed bonds cannot return. That is not the way things work, and neither of them was young enough to wish for magic to change rules that existed for real reasons. But something new began, something smaller and quieter than what had been there before, and entirely different in character, because it was not fate pulling them together. It was two people, with full knowledge of what the other was capable of, deciding to try. He withdrew from his political courtship the next morning in a letter to his court. He did it without asking Seraphine first, because it was the right thing to do regardless of what she decided, and because he wanted her to understand that what came next, if anything came next, would not be a transaction. She finished her work in the outer territories. She trained her apprentices until they were ready. She took 3 weeks. Then she rode north. Not because she had to, not because a bond told her to, but because she had spent 2 years finding out who she was, and the person she had found was not afraid of Calum Draven, and also, quietly and very inconveniently, loved him. She arrived at the obsidian throne without ceremony. He met her in the courtyard, just him, no court, no audience, because neither of them wanted a performance. A year later, on a full moon, they stood together on the high balcony of the obsidian throne and looked out at the hills. Nox did not call. There was nothing to call toward. She was already there.